Today, we're joined by Jamel Carly-Campbell. Jamel is an early years educator, consultant, advisor, and ambassador with over 19 years of experience in the sector. He is passionate about the impact the early years has on children's lives and about creating a workforce that mirrors the society we live in. He raises awareness about men in the early years and how to recruit and retain Black men in the sector. So welcome, Jamel. It's so good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us today. It's getting darker, and I know you've travelled all the way across London to get back home in time to do this, so we really appreciate it. And the first thing we wanted to ask you really was, can you tell us about how you became an early years educator?
Well, let me start by saying thank you to you, Julia, and thank you to Ben as well. Yeah, man, it's a blessing to be here and a blessing to share my story on your platform. How I got to be here. So it's a long story. Basically, by mistake, I've come to realize that it's not really a mistake, because look at me, I'm still here, 19 years down the line. But what happened is my first engagement with working with children at the age of 14 was with one of my cousins who was working at Connections in Woolwich. And he would bring me along and I'll help and support him. I was like 14 years old, helping with the younger children, and just doing little bits of admin and so on. And then in my local area, one night I was hanging around with a few friends and I walked past a youth club. And my uncle, my mentor, he happened to be running that youth club, and he's walked out and he saw me with a group of boys and he was like, what are you doing? What are you doing, man? Why don't you come inside? Come inside. And then I came inside and ended up spending the whole evening in the youth club. And he said, you know what, why don't you do this? Why don't you come and work with me, And then started to do the youth work. And then he said, why don't you go and get a qualification? And I was like, I never thought about that before, So I went and studied, done a GMVQ course. I think it was health and social care. And when I did that course, I had to do 4 placements. One was in a youth club, which I was working at. The second was in a school. The third was in a nursing home. And the last was in a nursery setting. And when I was in a nursery setting, I just had such a good time and I enjoyed myself. And at that time, in that particular setting, there was no men, And I realized that, wait a minute, there's no men that are doing this. And then I went on and did some more youth work. And then after doing the youth work, I ended up working in the after school club. And then I done a level 2, a cash certificate I did, a cash certificate in preschool practice. And then after the cash certificate in preschool practice, ended up getting a job in another nursery. I think that was Casterbridge Care. They're closed now. They ended up getting taken over by Bright Horizons, and I worked there for a number of years and got my level 3. And then after that, I just stuck with it and went on and worked in other nursery chains and so on, worked for Leaf for a number of years. And alongside that was just doing a lot of community work, So my life in early years has always run parallel with community work, youth work, mentoring and so on. So that's a snapshot of my journey,
And I think that really it's an amazing journey you've just said about, and it really leads me on to sort of the next thing, because obviously you're such a big role model to so many children. I know I've listened to you do other talks where you've spoken about how children that you've looked after sort of 19 years ago, they've come back to you with their children and things like that. How important is it to have those role models and mentors, as people go through their life?
It's so important. It is so important that, look, my uncle, my uncle pulled me off the street with a group of pals doing nothing, and said, come, do some youth work, you know? And I've always known my uncle was a man of many talents. He was a photographer, he was a preacher, real community leader, you know what I mean? And a lot of the youth in the area, some of them like have grown to big success. Some of them are in jail. Some of them, you know, they went, unfortunately, you know, passed away and so on. But he influenced them all, you know, and he influenced me in such a way and showed me that, you know what, there's a job to do, there's a service to do. And I remember like when eventually I was running the youth club, and he was like, yeah, I want you to put on a project, I want you to hold an event. And it was called, the company was called CIP, Community Inclusion Project. That's what it was called, Community Inclusion Project. Had 2 youth clubs and an office in the Arches in Deptford, yeah? And the Albany and Arches in Deptford. And I remember like some of the youth off the street, footballers, kids, nursery kids, like young, you know, and advising them and enabling them and empowering them and telling them, look, we can make solutions. Let us make the solutions. This is why we're Community Inclusion Project, because we're going to make all the solutions as a team. You know, it's not just us teaching you, you're teaching us, you know? So, and I think it's important that we empower the youth, because everyone has a voice that needs to be heard. Everyone has a voice that needs to be heard. And us as mentors, we make children see their true potential and make them find their voice, you know? Teach them about expression, teach them about the arts, build up their self-esteem, make them feel counted, make them feel included. So the role of mentors is so important, and community leaders, community figures, you know?
I read, Jamel, a bit that you wrote about, I think it was an interview where you were talking about Catford, and what came across in that interview for me was, and this is linked to what you're saying, I think, is that sense of community is so important, being a part of a community. And of course, your mentors and your role models are part of your community, aren't they, wherever you are?
Yeah. And
just how love is part of that community, and those familiar figures are part of that community, and you can't beat that way to hold children and families, you know, together.
Yeah. And I remember when I worked, the first nursery I worked in, it was a Sure Start nursery, Russia Green nursery. And I remember at first I was a little nervous because the children were so small, you know, and then I realized, like, when a few of the parents came in, they were parents from the area. So it was like, oh, you're right, what are you doing it? You're working it. Yeah, oh, that's really good. Could you work with my son? Could you work with my daughter? Can you this, that? Can you help them to? And because they, you know, when you've got those relationships, it just shows the true value of a nursery. You know, nurseries are important, and they should be part of the communities, as I said, the fabric of the community, just like the butchers, just like the bakers, just like your local mechanic, just like, you know, the local vendors on the street. You know, we're a part of it, and you know, having those good relationships, those positive relationships, and that connectivity, you know, like people are able to relate to you and understand that this is the person that comes from the area, you know, that you can see this person in Tesco's, you can see this person down the road, and they're helping me. You know, a lot of the time children go into settings and the environment is unfamiliar. The environment is so different to their home situation, and it could be a daunting thing for the parents and the child, you know. And I think that whole community vibe just brings it home. You come into a setting, you're hearing music from your environment, you're seeing faces from your community, you're smelling food that you would have had at home, you're seeing pictures or books and things like that. So yeah, the community, the nursery is a hub.
Yeah.
You know, the nursery is a hub, and it's such an important undervalued jewel in our community's crown, you know?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to put that.
Yeah,
the jewel in our community's crown. I'm gonna have that in my head now for some time to come. That lovely phrase, a brilliant phrase. Jamel, I know you work hard and you talk a lot about raising the profile and getting more men in early years and getting more black men in early years. And I know there's statistics to show how minute that amount of black men in early years is particularly. And we just wondered, what do you think needs to happen and needs to change to encourage more black men into early years?
People just need to know we're here, and not in a tokenistic way. It needs to be organic. It needs to be authentic. Black men need to be employed that are quality, that are really into early years, that really care about children. And also, I feel like a lot needs to change within the early years itself to entice more men in general into the field. Pay is a big thing.
Yeah.
You can't join the early years if you're looking to get rich. You can't. It's not that kind of profession. You really need to be passionate and seeing children thrive. You need to be passionate about child development, passionate, just about the future of our society. But that's what we're doing. We're laying the foundations for the future. And I think getting more, how do you say it, equipped in settings to take on black men, and understanding that, we've been through a lot and we're still going through a lot, and there's a lot that needs to change in the world. Also, there's this whole thing with imposter syndrome, like when you look at the hierarchy of the early years and you look at, the pyramid, and the higher you go up, the less black faces you see. Panels. A lot of the time, our panels are not diverse. And when we look at diversity, the focus is either on sexuality or gender, and there's not a lot of focus on race, and there's a company called Wannels that highlight, that are basically campaigning against, panels that are whitewashed, because our community is cosmopolitan. So why are our panels not cosmopolitan? And if we have cosmopolitan panels and we have cosmopolitan hierarchies, cosmopolitan senior management teams, then that would encourage more people to come into the profession, because at least then they know that if I want to climb, if I want to move forward within this sector, I can. And when I do, I'm not alone. When I do, I don't feel isolated. There's a few of us here. There's balance.
It goes back to your the role model thing you said earlier as well. Your uncle was your role model there. And that's where your passion for it all came from. And what you're doing is going to inspire the next generation as well. But it just needs more of it to happen quickly.
Yeah. And on my journey, I've met so many, black practitioners, black educators, black teachers, and so on. And there's some amazing people that I've met on this length of my journey, like the Josh Simmonses, the Liz Pembertons, the Laura Henrys, do you know what I mean? And it's lovely when you see each one of these individuals, weaving. And I've said this before. It's a tapestry. It's a carpet. It's an orchestra. I've said all these things. When we all play together and we have that unified mind state, that mindset that we want to change the world and make the world a better place for children, and we want to enable children, it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing. And what people need to know, that diversity stretches our reach. The more diverse we are, the more people take us serious. The more people we have singing our praises and acknowledging who we are as a sector, and not seeing us as a as a holding bay for children, you know, until they go to school. You know, the early years is the foundation of all learning. The early years is the foundation for the rest of our children's lives, as I've said before. So, yeah, it's important that more men are in the sector. The figures are ridiculous, you know, from 2% to 3% to 4% in England of males being part of the workforce, and 0.5, and that's just me being kind, of those men in the workforce being black. That's me being kind. Shade Tembo, he wrote a report about it. Look out for it, guys. Shade is an amazing man, amazing researcher. And you can see the importance. Liz Pemberton, she done a article, it came out, I think it was yesterday or the day before, it was yesterday actually, on Nursery World, yeah? And she was talking about inclusion, you know, and representation and its importance. I'm talking about a young boy that had watched Black Panther, you know, and how powerful that the imagery of a black superhero was to him, and him coming in and sharing that with the group, you know. And, you know, like, you can just, even though we're just talking about a child watching a cartoon, a movie, of a superhero and coming in, and a lot of time that gets taken for granted. Because that child sharing their experience and their views, they then share that with the rest of their friends. And the rest of their friends will then go on and watch that movie and say, oh, wow, this guy, Black Panther, you know, little Tommy likes Black Panther. Black Panther's this, that, the third. And then they all want to be superheroes, and they all understand that they're all important. You know? Social construct, you know, it is important. The information that we feed, and we even in our our pedagogy, our curriculum, our environments, like our workforce, it impacts on our children's mindsets, you know.
Well, we were talking about that today, weren't we?
Weren't we? Yeah.
We were talking about the Alison Hammond Back to School program that was on last month, and just the effect of having seen Black people throughout British history, you know, and actually it's not Black history, it's English history, it's British history, and Black people are part of that all the way back to Roman times, you know, and but it's never shown. You know, and so those visions are never shared, and that's the issue.
It's true. Like, there was Black people in the time of the Tudors. Do you know what I mean? And before, you know, those Black people that were part of the Spanish Armada. You know, people don't know that. You know what I mean? There's Black people, sailors, merchants, millionaires. You know, empires. Emperors that were Black. You know, but. The key thing that we need to push for is this. We need to celebrate diversity, and understand that diversity doesn't only mean black or brown or blue or pink or purple. It means white people too. We need to understand that whether you're white, black, orange, turquoise, we are unique, and we are all important, and we should all be celebrated. There's a lot of things that have how do you say it, caused the infrastructural racism that is out there, yeah, and some people are indirectly racist based on that factor, and they don't understand it. But it's time for us to research and read and really look into ourselves, reflect on our practice, and reflect on who we are and what we know and our mindsets, and how that can affect the children that we teach. It's like, I've been into settings where they only have Black books out during Black History Month. I've gone to settings where they only have books out on books about China during Chinese New Year, books about Diwali, during Diwali. Diwali's actually coming up. But why are those books not out just throughout the whole year? I know these times, these particular times are important, but these different types of people make up our community.
Yeah, and if you're not represented, you don't feel seen. You're not seen.
Yeah.
You feel like you're not here. You're not belonging in this place, wherever that is. If that's the nursery or the school or the community or the country.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you're represented, like you were talking about that child that watched that the Black Panther movie, you know, you feel represented. You've arrived. You're here. You're seen.
Mm-hmm.
You belong.
You belong. And there's some communities, like the further you go up north, where those communities are 99% white. Some of those people in those communities have never seen a black person before. Mm-hmm. And some of these settings will think, well, how does that affect me? Like having a black book or having a this book or that book in my setting. But it does. Because when those people from those cities, those places, go into the inner city, go into London, go into diverse areas, it's a culture shock. They don't know what to do with themselves. And I know this, I have scope to speak on this, yeah, as a black man that has gone to some of these cities up north, and I'm stared at, looked at, treated differently. Yeah. I've done talks. I remember I'd done a talk. How old was I? I think I was 17 or 18. 17. During that time, I'd done several talks actually with the school in Dorset. Yeah, big agricultural college. Yeah, and I remember talking about the inner city life, you know, to a lot of the youth there. And there were a few biracial children mixed. But it was predominantly white, yeah. And they were so they were in awe of the youth and myself and what we were saying about our lives in the inner city. Now, why should it be a culture shock? We live in the same country. The reason why it's a culture shock, because in nursery, these things weren't being shown to them. They don't know that these people exist. They don't know that these foods exist. They don't know that little Bobby down the road likes agusi and jollof. They don't know that little Jamal likes rice, peas, jerk, chicken, and coleslaw and hardo bread. They don't know that Anne Wayne from Trinidad likes dal and roti and palau. Culture shock. And it can happen the other way around as well. Black children not socializing or seeing white people, and then when they go to a place that's predominantly white, it's like, oh my word. But the difference is white people are well and overrepresented. Black people ain't.
Yeah.
You know, and it's time for us to stop shying away from these issues and just talking about it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to lead on to our next question is how can we talk with young children about the challenging things they're seeing in the world, in their immediate world and their communities? You know, what's the best way to approach it?
Just with honesty, you know, transparency. You know, you can talk about, if we're going to use an area, I always like using expressive art, EAD, yeah, in the EYFS. So what I would do is have skin tone, colors that match skin tone, yeah. So we have paints like brown paints, light brown, different things like that, and then we'll have mirrors. And we'll ask the children to paint themselves, paint self-portraits, yeah? Paint a picture of yourself, how you envision yourself. Choose a color that matches your skin tone. What color are your eyes? What colors are your, what size are your lips? What's your nose like? Having those conversations and starting them, not just, some people just start these conversations because, all right, this is what we've got to do. The curriculum says we need to talk about communities and values and culture and this, that. No, we need to be doing this just in general, in general, because at the end of the day, our approach should be a child-centered approach. So why not start with the children in our settings? White people are not just pink. There's different tones. White people ain't white. Do you know what I mean? There's different tones. Yeah. Let's talk about these tones. Let's talk about where your parents from, with your language. Let's do nonsense rhymes in our in literacy, or during our circle times, or just randomly out in the playground. And let's talk about language. Let's sing number songs in different languages. Un, deux, trois, quatre, cinq, six, or uno, dos, tres. Let's do that. Let's play with words. Let's encourage you to say hello. In your tongue that you speak at home, your dialect you speak at home. Let's talk about your difference. Let's talk about your flag. Let's talk about your food. Let's talk about it. This is how we can address these issues. Sickness. We could talk about life. We could talk about death. We could talk about anything. How do we do so? Okay, let's get some spiders in a box. Talk about what spiders eat. What's their environment? How do they? Do you know what I mean? There's so many things that we can use in our environment that links back to the themes of today. Because the children are listening, and sometimes they might come into your setting and share something with you. And it's for us as the educator to then make that into a learning experience.
Jamel, I wanted to ask you about how important the theory and knowledge of child development is to your practice. I know we talked before we started recording about, you showed us a big pile of books that you're going to be reading later, and so I just wanted to ask you a bit about that and how that feeds into what into your daily practice as well. Yeah,
do you know what? I'm crazy. Like, my mind, I read all the time. There's a guy called Connor Braithwaite. Yeah, big up Connor. And he said the best thing you can do being an educator is to read. Yeah, is to read. And my mind, I don't always, it's like, sometimes I think, I've read this book, I've read that book, I've read this, I've read that. And then someone asks me a question and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't remember. But then I'll start talking about something, a subject, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, that's this. Yes, that's Vygotsky. That's blah, that's this, that's Bowlby, that's Piaget, that's that. And I start reading off things. I enjoy reading in general. And when you're passionate about something, it's important to read, I've got books to the left of me. I've got books over there on the desk. I've got books in my bag. I'm constantly reading, and I just apply it in my day-to-day, I watch videos, and sometimes I'll be saying something, like I'll do an activity based on my knowledge, and someone will look at me and think, what are you doing now? That's not, I'll be like, oh no, that's because I'm trying to stimulate, the vestibular senses and proprioceptive senses. Yeah. So when I tip Timmy over or I roll Charlotte, it's because I'm trying to, stimulate, those senses that are to do with balance. What balance? Okay, this can you explain? Okay, go on YouTube, look on Brain Highways. There's a video about A, B, and Z. And then I went back as well and I studied science. Just to, obviously going down the teacher's pathway. I had my English, had my maths, went back and studied science. And then it's like things just started to connect. And then I'm having conversations with people about sensory processing and things like that. And I'm like, oh, snap, I know this. This is brilliant. Oh, wow. I like, okay. And talk with me. And then we'll talk and we'll reason. We talk about patterns in behavior. We'll talk about different approaches, the ABA and this and that and all these abbreviations. And I remember how I realized, that me reading, because I don't class myself as an academic, but how much reading helped me is when I had an interview and they were like, wow, you said the whole EYFS, but you've done it all in abbreviations. I've never had anyone do that before in an interview. And I was like, that's just crazy. That's just the way I remembered it, you know? UW, EAD, you know, L, M, SCL, do you know what I mean? PSED, that's just me, PD, you know, characteristics of learning, this, that, like, and that's just the way I done it. So yeah, theory is so important. Theory is the backbone to our practice, you know? And yeah, I do your research, read what you can, and then test it out, test out things in your settings, you know? And then you'll see how these theories work. And you know what's so funny? As the years go by, you realize that sometimes theory isn't always correct. You know, I had a neuroscientist, I was at a conference and he was saying that Piaget's theory on child development is wrong. You know, and I was like, what? He was like, yeah, we're always, our brains are always developing, you know, even at this age, our brains are developing. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, all right, he put it like this. He goes, all right, imagine a person with no license learning how to drive. Yeah. At first, you're clueless. You don't know how to drive. But after repetition, you've then learned a new skill. You've learned how to drive. That is why the theory's wrong. And I was like, oh my word. Like, you know, it just like, what is this? So, yeah, man, it's good to read and it's good to watch stuff as well if you're not much of a reader, and just talk to other educators, other specialists, other people, you know, and they'll help you hone your skills, help you to hone your skills.
When you were talking about that, it's making me have that enthusiasm and that way that you were talking about. Then I learned this, and then I learned this, and then things. You know, I remembered that, and then that connected to that, and that whole making connections thing reminded me as you were talking. It's so important for us as adults to keep learning, because we remember what it's like for the children, and they're learning, because that's what they're doing, isn't it? They're making connections millions of times a day. That is mind-blowing, isn't it? But that's what they're doing, you know, and that's what you were just describing now as an adult, you know. And that's another reason, isn't it, why it's so important, because then we don't forget what they're doing every day. Those children, they're doing that every day, much better than we could ever do anymore, because
much better,
lost that ability.
But,
you know,
it's mind-blowing. And do you know what, like, that's what I seek joy from. Like, I remember when I done a obstacle course in a particular setting I was working in. We didn't have a playground, and I was part of a project, the HEY project, Healthy Early Years project. And, you know, you get different awards, you get the gold, the silver, and so on. We got the gold. And I would set up these table obstacle courses, and other practitioners would be like, oh my gosh, it's so dangerous. Like, what are you doing? Like, I'm like, look, I'm going to put cushions out. We can't always go to the park. We need something to do. Take off socks, take off shoes. We're going to do this. And I remember setting a little, I called it, what did I call it again? The Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon, that's what I called it. And I made a little gap between two of the tables, you know? And it was so amazing to see that the children, like the ones that weren't so confident, you know, their confidence developing of how they got across the gap, you know, bum shuffling first, or sliding across first, or not wanting to do it. And then we'll do it again, do the activity again. Okay, this time I'm going to try. If you hold my hand, I'll walk across, then I'll do the rest myself. And, you know, that confidence, doing it, that repetition, having fun, sliding down, going under, climbing, building, repetition. And then you'll see that child just one day make that step, and you're like, oh my gosh, you get it. It's good. You've done it. Well done. Let's make it wider. Set more challenge. Okay. And then it's like, oh my days, what has he done? Like, this is, and then they'll work it out, and they'll build their confidence. And it's just like, it's such a powerful thing, you know, seeing children thrive. And then it just makes you think about the children that are not getting those opportunities, you know, and that is, you know, that's what touches me. You know, the fact that there's children out here that are not getting that stimulation. There's children out here that are not reaching that their expected levels, you know, like in their development. And, you know, we need, there's so much more that needs to be done.
Yeah.
There's so much more that needs to be done. And it just shows how important our roles are, you know, on all levels, be you OT, senior leadership, behavioral management, whatever you are, SALT, you know, like we're all important.
Yeah.
You've talked a lot about that before, I think, haven't you? I've watched talks by you and read things where you talk about that impact that we as adults working in the early years, the impact of the early years and how important it is on children's lives and on families' lives. Can't underestimate it.
You can't. And we don't sing our praises enough. And that's why I do it. I'll sing. I've seen some people do some amazing things. Like today, prime example today in a setting where I'm based now. They put me, because I was in a key stage 1 room as a LSA, but they've put me in the early years class to support. Yeah. And on the early years floor, the early years lead and the TAs, they created their own indoor bonfire night. And I was just looking, and I sat there and they were looking at me like, okay, what's Jay gonna say? Like, you know, I know he's here. All right, let's, you know what I mean? And I'm looking at them and I'm like, this is amazing. And the children just done their thing. There was like a bowl, there was like a tray with cereal in it, like, so it made like a crunching sound. They had like a little audio set, like a speaker playing fireworks. They had like bubble wrap on the floor. They had, you know, when you've got like laminated sheets with paint in it, squidge in it. They had all these different activities and leaves with glitter and, oh, it was brilliant. And it was all in the hallway. It wasn't even in a class. It was in the hallway. And because of the bubble we're in, I think it was like 3 classes together, all in the same bubble. And it was amazing, you know? So praises, you know who you are. Praises to you guys. Praises to the head of early years as well. Amazing activity. I loved it, you know? I loved it. And I'm a person, like, things like that, you know, they touch me inside, because it's like, I know during this COVID time, we're not going to be able to go bonfire night, or children aren't going to be able to experience it. They're not going to be able to, you know what I mean, do the social things that we would normally do. But for them to do that inside the corridor the way they done today, just praises to the team, man. Praises, like that. It was just, yeah, man, touching. I didn't show it at the time, but I was just like, this is good. I was just smiling. I was like, yeah, amazing. It was good. It was.
I remember when I was a reception teacher, around this time of year, the children would build bonfires like that outside, and literally every resource would be piled up in this massive pile in the middle. Just like they were doing on the seafront, though, because on the seafront they would build a big bonfire to light on bonfire night. So that's what the children were recreating.
Yeah, I even said that. I said that today. I was like, "Well, we're gonna set a real fire." I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait," because I've done similar things before in a setting, but obviously, you can't do it. You can't do it inside. Oh man, we make a difference in children's lives, and you know, we need the recognition. You know, not even like we need it; we deserve it. We deserve the recognition. You know, the government, the communities, they really need to know the important things we do. Children don't just come to nursery to play. You know, children don't just come to nursery to play. There's theory behind it. There's assessments. There's observations. You know, the environment. There's a pedagogy. And that's why I loved when London's Early Years Foundation, who I used to work for, you know, they said, like, you are a teacher. You know, first you start off as a practitioner, but once you become enriched in the method of teaching, pedagogy, like, you're a teacher. You are a teacher. You know, you are a pedagogue. Yeah? That's what you are. And, you know, we need to start acknowledging that. You know, instead of us being separated or us separating ourselves from the rest of the education sector, you know, we are one.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamel, we have one last question.
Yes.
Which, I mean, you've talked so much with joy in this podcast, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I'm going to hope you're going to find another thing to say. So the question is there a moment of joy or excitement that you've shared with a child recently that you can tell us about today?
Joy. Always. Yeah. All right. So, was it yesterday? Was it today? It was today. It was today. Little man, I'm in a new room, and like the children, they're just getting to know me. Like, I only started on Monday.
Wow.
And it's like, you know, with children, they can just tell, innit? They can tell. They suss you out from the beginning. And I remember, it was today. It was today. We had a session. I think it was a P session, and was playing some music, you know. And I must have put on some nice soulful house music, South African house. I love music. I'm a musical person. I'll play Bob Marley. I'm crazy. Children, they love it. I play music all the time, yeah. And I played the South African house, and the young man, like, his face. My colleagues, the ladies in the room, they were like, you know, when it comes to music time, you know, he's very fussy, yeah. And when I played the music, he just looked at me dead straight. And this young man is pre-verbal. And he said, oh, blah, blah, blah. So it said something, like he babbled and said something. And he's looked at me and he's giving me a little smile. I've given him a little smile. And then he just started just vibing to the music. Like, was just rocking. And I was like, that's nice. That's nice. I brought something new. You know, a type of music that wouldn't have been played in that class before. Sharing culture. And me, I'm vibing, they're vibing, the children are dancing, everyone's happy. And it was crazy because today, like, we were short. Like, we had two members of staff down. You know, we had someone come in to support that wasn't based in the room. I'm not based in the room. And you know how that can be unsettling for our children that are neurodiverse, you know? And do you know what? And neurotypical, what we call neurotypical, yeah? It can be unsettling having new faces, not having consistent faces within a room. And it was just nice. And I felt like a form of acceptance. You know, like, yeah, man, we like you, man. You're all right. You're cool. You're cool. You're good. You know? So that was my bit of joy, you know, from today.
That's really good.
It's lovely. There's nothing more heartwarming than that feeling of acceptance when you're with a group of children, is there? When you feel like they've let you arrive with them, you know. Yeah. Very special.
100%, man. It's beautiful. Children, you just got to give children time. You know, some people will think, you know, like when you first meet a child and they're not sure of you, they might get upset. I just leave them. I'm like, all right, you know what? In time. My own nephew didn't like me at first. You know, he cried. You know, now he's a big boy, going secondary school. He loves me. You know? One of them, yeah, they both love me. But the youngest, he used to scream down the place. But I just left him. And as he got older, you know, all the time. Where's Uncle? Where's Uncle? Asking for me. I think because he was a little wary of me, you know, it's like, where is he? Is he going to pop up? But then it became a fascination and a connection, you know, and that's really important.
Yeah. Jamel, thank you so much. It's been so wonderful talking to you. Really, really has. You've brought such wisdom and joy to this dark Wednesday evening. So thank you. Really appreciated. Thanks for listening. And if you liked our podcast, please rate and review us. And don't forget to subscribe so you know when the next one goes live.